Well, we're doing something a little bit different this week. Abigail is joining me, and we want to give you the top 5 list of books that we've read in 2020. And Abigail, it was King Solomon who, in the book of Ecclesiastes, said that of the writing of endless books, there is no shortage, and it's true. You can wear yourself out by reading, and so out of the millions of books in the world that people could read, we're going to suggest 5 that we read this year that we thought were great and we thought that our community might benefit from. So for each of these books, we're going to try to give you guys the main idea of the book and why we think you should read it. And of course, there's links to each of these books in the description for this video. So it should be easy for you to find those if you're interested in checking them out. So Abby, are you ready?
I'm ready.
For me, the number one book that I want to recommend that people check out is a book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. And the main idea of this book is that the single largest factor shaping our lives today is probably technology, and especially our compulsive use of smartphones in general and social media in particular. And he makes a really good case that what's at stake is our attention, that what we're paying attention to minute by minute throughout our day. And if your attention is being taken in a compulsive way, then you're really not in control of that. It's something that is becoming addictive. So he makes the case that we want to learn how to live our lives by paying attention to the things that we truly value. So we have to know what those are, and then we have to be very skilled at staying on track with our attention with those things. So this book, Digital Minimalism, is really about winning back control of your life, and it laid out really practical steps to help you clarify your values and then game plan your use of technology and social media so that you actually live in step with your values. And why I think people should check it out is I think it's the most practical book that I have read. And I think it's one of the most pressing problems of our time, compulsive use of smartphones and social media. So this was really well written. It was on point and very practical. So that would be my number one book recommendation for 2020, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. So Abby, how about you?
Oh, I'm going to definitely have to put that one on my list. I hate growth, personal growth, but apparently it's the year for it. So my first book is very similar in some ways. They might really go well together. Is Boundaries by Henry Cloud. This is an older book, but I have procrastinated reading it for many years, and this 2020 was the time to do it for me. This book really takes a look at all of the relationships in our lives, including our relationships with ourselves and with God, and takes each one of those and looks at the boundaries that we have or don't have in those relationships. It's really a great look at how those can break down, how boundaries really affect everything. I had no idea getting into this, just how much the boundaries played a role in all of the things that we struggle with. So like I said, I did procrastinate reading this one because it's personal growth, like I said. But I did, and I think that you too will really benefit from it. It's not as intense as I thought it was going to be. It's a pretty great overview. I know that just by glancing at his page that they have then gone on to write a bazillion extra books. So there's like boundaries in marriage and boundaries with children, et cetera, et cetera. So if you know what like your overall boundaries, I guess you could zone in, but this is a great overlook. So this is a good way to check our pulse on all of our different boundaries that we have. So it has a chapter on all of those individual relationships, and it gives really good and practical ways to check to see the health of those boundaries. And then if you have some struggles, how to kind of put those boundaries into place. So it really is very over the top. So I think over the top as in it's a kind of not going super deep on any one of those relationships. So I think it's good, especially for people like me who don't like to self-reflect, to then get a good overview of all those things. Like, it was very beneficial for me to take a look at my relationship with my kids and my husband and in ministry and all those areas that I'm like, I'm good. I've got it all good figured out. So guess what? I didn't have it all figured out, and this book helped me. So I think you guys will enjoy it too. And I promise it's not as scary as you might think if you're someone like me. So that's my first book.
When I saw this one on your list, I was really happy because, very similar to you, I've heard about this book for years. My wife and I actually read it this year as well in 2020, and it was a great book. So I do think great recommendation, and I do hope people will check that out. So the third book that we're going to recommend this year is Letters to the Church by Francis Chan. And the big idea in this book is that since the very beginning, there has been worship that men offer God. Since Cain and Abel, there's been worship that men offer to God that he finds favor with, and there's worship that we offer God that he rejects. And Francis Chan makes the case that the kind of worship that many of the churches in America today are offering God, in his view, actually displeases God, which is a pretty heavy way to start the book off. But from that starting point, each chapter is really a letter addressing a specific area of worship that the church in America is currently offering that is probably out of step with what God is actually looking for. And so I thought it was really insightful, and I thought it was an honest look at our state of worship in the American church today. Why I think people should read it. I think he does do a great job of identifying some real problems in the church today. But it's not just a book where he complains about what's wrong with the church. I think he also gives some great clarity from Scripture about what our motivations and what our mission should be. And that's a good starting point. I don't think he goes too far into trying to lay out the solutions. So he's not proposing a certain structure or certain changes as much as he is trying to identify what is it that we're actually doing as we're worshiping God, and is it what he's looking for? And if not, then how can we reflect on that and begin to make changes? So that would be the third book that we would recommend as a team this year, Letters to the Church by Francis Chan.
Yes. And you guys, if you were here for last year's favorite books, this was one of my favorite books of 2019. So that means it's been on our list 2 years in a row. So I don't know what you're doing. Go ahead and read it right now because we're telling you should. It is really good. And I think one of the best things is that Chan really has figured out how to find that balance of pointing out biblical truths about the church, but his love for the church really shines through, which kind of helps with some of the negative things, is that he truly loves the church. And so it's not just like a church bashing situation that we find ourselves in sometimes. So definitely a great one to check out. So my second book for this year is called The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. So this book came across my path probably during the first wave of racial tension here in the United States of 2020 anyway. And so I started reading it and really could not put it down. It's very easy to read. It kind of covers history of the church in America. So this is focused particularly on the United States. And maybe starting like a little bit pre-Revolutionary War timeframe. And it goes all the way up to the present time. And it takes a look at the church and how we've handled race within the church. So at some points I was very uncomfortable as a white girl, and I seriously loved how he laid out the history very clearly. But obviously as a writer, it's hard to leave out your personal opinion. So there was some personal opinion in there, but I loved how I could then he would talk about Jonathan Edwards, and I'd be like, what, for real? And I would run off and be able to quickly research the facts. And so anytime that I felt like, oh man, this is crazy, how could this possibly be, I could easily go and look that up for myself and not feel like I was, getting one person's opinions or swayed, whatever. So this is a great, great book if you are just trying to try to figure out, like many of us are, just the racial tensions within the church and our country, and how can we help in that area? What part do we play? And so if anything, this book just helped me to identify some of the things that some of the messages that we are all receiving all the time, and identify what they were saying to me, how they were impacting my belief system. So it was really, really helpful going into the 2020 election timeframe when politics and religion were just like playing together. And I was like, whoa. So anyway, all that to say, I really think this is a great book to get you started if this is a topic that you are also wanting to learn more about and dip your toe in this. And honestly, we all should. So go read this book. It's really good.
Yeah,
All
so
right,
that
Andrew. What do you got
we're,
next?
we're going to wrap it up with the fifth book that we're going to recommend this year, and that is a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death by
This is the
Neil
fourth book.
Postman. So you've read this one too, Abby?
No. This is just our fourth book, right?
No, this is number five,
Oh,
um, which is okay. So number five is Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And the main idea behind this book, which I thought was fascinating, he makes the case that the technology we use to communicate changes what we talk about, how we think, and ultimately it shapes the culture that we're a part of. So I thought this was so fascinating. He traces the history of human culture and how it's been affected by what he considers three major shifts in the technology that we use to communicate. So the first shift was moving from mainly communicating by speaking to also communicating by writing. So that the first shift. The second would be from writing to printing, so the printing press, and how that transformed the world really, but also culture. And then how more recently in the 20th century, we began to shift from a print culture to a digital culture, and especially a video culture. And so television is actually what he talks about. And that's because Neil Postman wrote this book in the 1980s. But it's so relevant to us in 2020. I think he was some sort of a cultural prophet. He gives some fascinating insights in this book about how technology is changing our culture by changing the way we think. And so I'll let you read it, but we're learning to think. For instance, we're learning to think right now. We're learning to think in short bursts that are really disconnected. So, like a Twitter culture is going to communicate much differently than a war and peace culture or a crime and punishment culture, where there's this massive book that's training your mind to follow a narrative over a course of weeks as you're reading it. And so it's a great book. I think it's got a lot of applications to help us understand why a lot of what's happening today is happening, why we can't seem to have a meaningful conversation with people who think differently than us. We think in sound bites and slogans, and we communicate that way. And a lot of it's because the technology we use is actually training us to think and communicate this way. So I think for those of us who are interested in communicating the message of Jesus, there are really relevant insights that we need to be aware of. So Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman would be another book that is worth checking out. So guys, that's our top 5 books from 2020. Abby, any last thoughts from you?
No, it went by so fast, I miscounted. So it was a lot of fun, and we hope you guys will check these books out. Also, I want to know what other people have been reading. So I really hope people will
Yeah,
let us know what their favorite books of 2020 were.
absolutely. If you've got some recommendations that you think our community should know about, then leave those in the comments below. And you'll notice that this list is kind of a combination of books that are obviously spiritual and books that are a little bit more cultural and practical. And that's because every week we're trying to put out content that helps you live and share your faith in the modern world. And so we need to be aware of how both of those things affect our living out of our faith. So if this video was encouraging and helpful, then we ask you to give it a like, consider sharing it with others, and we will see you next time.
Bye, guys.